We're all doing well today. We're learning Maseches Gittin Daf Mem Ches, and we are learning a machlokes that we just started last night between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And you can just take a peek at the very top of this page on Mem Ches and Aleph that Bisman Shehayovel Noheg. This is not where we're starting from, but it's a good starting point for us as it relates to Chazara, because otherwise we'll be clueless tonight. We have a machlokes bisman shehayovel noeg that Rabbi Yochanan says you're mevi ukore, even though the land will not be permanently yours, because in Yovel the land's going to go back. We still say kore, even though the pasuk says that it's sadeh asher nasato li, and it's really not your sadeh. It's by Yovel it's going to go back. Afal pikein Rabbi Yochanan says mevi vikore. You still read the psukim, and Reish Lakish says mevi ve'eno kore because it's not really your field. So we're starting about 10 lines down or so, right after the word tzricha toshma, and we see a brisa that tries to lean in one direction. Hakone ilan v'karkao, a man who purchases an ilan and its karka, mevi v'kore. So this is a raya for Rav Yochanan. Look at the top line of Yochanan, mevi v'kore. Afal pi, that you're not going to end up owning this land in the future, because by Yovel, the land's going to go back to the original owner. So because that's the case, maybe we have a raya for Rav Yochanan. Hacha b'maya skinan bizman she'ena Yovel noeg. A little bit of a sneak out. Really, we're talking about a time when Yovel isn't noheg, so therefore, the fact that we say mevi v'kore is not a raya, because bisman she'ein Yovel, when we're not being noheg Yovel, the property isn't, let's say a day like today, the property isn't going to go back to the original owner. Stam, it's a chakira why we don't keep Yovel today. I mean, other than the fact that we don't know when it is. But why won't we say that every 8th year is a suffix doraisa? Okay, this is its own conversation, not for now. Let's try another brisa just a little bit further down. Tashma, if I buy 2 trees in your field, so then maybe ve'eno kore. This Mishnah speaks without any machlokes. There's no maybe v'kore and hashlosha, but if there are 3, then maybe v'kore. And again, seemingly a support for Rav Yochanan, because we see that when you have 3 trees, it's maybe v'kore. So it says the Gemara, no, again, same answer, hachanami bisman she'ein ha'yovel noeg. So there's no raya from here. And again, still no good answers in regards to Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish as to who we hold like. And the Gemara says a third of the way down, v'hashta da'amar Rav Chizda machlokes be'yovel sheni. We don't even know what this means yet. What's yovel sheni? No idea. So we'll learn about it in a minute. But just saying, the Gemara presents something as though we're smart, as though we're knowledgeable. But Hashda, now that we know that the Rav Chizda qualified the machlokas of Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish is only talking about B'yovel Sheni, aval B'yovel Rishon divrei hakol mevi v'kore. Everyone agrees that in regards to the Yovel Rishon, for sure you're going to read also, even though it's Sadesh and Asatali. So there, Dakati lo samach alai, because we didn't yet have what to rely upon. I'm going to explain this in a moment. So therefore, lo kasha, these 2 cases, the tashmas that we started with tonight are really not problematic. Haba Yovel Rishon, Haba Yovel Sheni. What is going on with this Gemara? So the Gemara, the Rishonim explain over here that what's going on is like this. The first time the Jewish people had to keep Yovel, there was this din, the first time Chiddush din that the Jews heard for the first time, that by year 50, you're going to lose all of your property. And they weren't sure what actually was going to happen, if they were going to lose their property, if they were going to not lose their property. So that's what the Gemara means when it says, Lo samach da'atayu, that they weren't sure that it was actually going to take place. And therefore, by Yovel Rishon, what was their mindset when they were unsure if Yovel would actually take place and they'd actually get their land back? When they made a sale, it was a real sale. So by Yovel Rishon, by the first Yovel, the first 50 years after, again, exactly when it was, it's its own discussion, but let's say year 50 after the Jews moved into Eretz Yisrael with Yoshua. So year 50, they were not sure. And therefore, in the first 49 years that they made sales, their whole brain was that it's a total sale. So then maybe v'kore. Masha'en came be Yovel Sheni, the subsequent Yovel, which everyone, because in year 50, we know that the sale is real, and now everything's coming back to ownership in year 50. So therefore, in the subsequent year, that's where the machlokes is. And that's what the Gemara says is a good answer to solve for these 2 small brisas, where one of them is probably talking about Yovel Rishon, and therefore maybe V'kore, because by Yovel Rishon, people weren't sure that Yovel was actually going to return the land, and therefore their intent in sale was permanent, and therefore maybe V'kore.
Why didn't they come up with something like the prosbol for the land? Or was that much later?
Much later. Yovel is a din in Chumash. This is by the times of Yoshua. Prosbol didn't happen until Hillel.
No, but the din of no interest and not making the loans was also at this. I mean, that's also what I thought. Difference is there was a reason to do it.
I don't understand. I'm not even understanding the question. What can you say it again?
The question is just like a prosbol is so that the person doesn't.
Limit themselves from
Right.
loaning. Yeah.
Right? So then maybe they could come up with some sort of mechanism that the land doesn't go back.
A loophole against the
For
dough
what
rice,
function?
just like Prusel.
That's what I would.
Yeah.
For
No.
one function, so because this way people aren't buying land because they think they're gonna have to give it back.
But
There's no-
right. There's
no-
nothing. There's
it's
no
not
right.
buying
David's point is spot on, which is that there's nothing negative about not transacting in this way. There's a huge negative in the realm of Prusbel to not loan money to people. Huge negative. That's how Klal Yisrael functions. I mean, we need money sometimes from people.
Well, that's
So
the
we
thing.
take
If a
loans.
person owns a piece of land and he's not making money, he can sell that.
Okay, yeah, you're 2 steps removed. Not just that there's not a sale, but therefore he can't profit from it. So I've never heard the question, and I think David's answer certainly is in the realm of possibility, a strong realm of possibility. Don't know, I'm not sure. Then the Gemara says that perhaps this machlokes Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan lema kitanoi, and you have to put on your thinking caps for this sugya, as Tzvi, who was just here, just foreshadowed for us, and that is as follows. We have this concept called stei achuza and a concept called stei mikneh. So stei achuza is a case scenario where we'll see 2 different iterations of this, where somebody gets a field from their father. If they are makneh that field, if they're makdish that field, so then when Yovel hits, they don't get their field back. So let's say I get a property from my parents, and then I'm makdish the field, and then Yovel kicks in. So Bezdin took my field and sold it for cash. So when there's Yovel, where does the property fall? Does it fall back to me? Or does it fall back to Bezdin? The halacha is that by stei achuza, it falls back to Bezdin. But by a sedei mikneh, which was a regular sale, then it goes back to the initial Ruvain, whoever that may be. That said, let's look at how it's possible that there's a machlokes tanoim in regards to Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, that there is precedent for each of their sources. Minayin lelokeach sadeh me'avi v'hikdisha. Let's say that a man buys a field from his father, and then the father passes away. So he was makdish the field, and then the father passed away. How do we know that the din is that it has the halacha of stei achuza, that during Yovel, the property does not go back to the son, but rather the property goes back to Bezdin? Where do we know this from? Talmud Lomar, because the pasuk says, and what's the drasha on the pasuk? The only time we have a din that it goes back to the initial owner is when it's not ra'ui to be a stei achuza, when it's not something that was given to a child. And yatis sazu, but in our case, because our case is a stei achuza, sheru'i li'o stei achuza, to Rabbi Yehuda of Reb Shimon, therefore the money doesn't go back to the initial son, but rather it goes back only as far as Bezdin. That's what happens during Yovel. Rav Meir says that's not pshat in the pasuk. Rav Meir omer minayin lelokeach sadeh me aviv umeis aviv ve'achar kach hikdisha. A very subtle but important difference between the 2 cases. In case number 1 of Rabbi Yehuda of Reb Shimon, the flow of events was that he bought it from the father. He was makdish to the Beis Hamikdash, and then his father died. Here it's different. Here his father died, and then he was makdish to the Beis Hamikdash. So Rav Meir says, "Minayin shetehei lefanav ki stei achuza." How do we know that in such a case that this is a stei achuza, where the hektish was done after the death of the father? Talmud Lomar, the same pasuk, so sada she'ena sada achuza. The only time this is true is when it's a field that's not stei achuza. Yatzasazu she sada stei achuza. This is actually a stei achuza. So there's a machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon on the one side, and Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Meir on the other side, as to how we define this case. Do we say, like the initial Tanakama said, like Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon, that the case that we're talking about is a case where the son bought a property from the father, and then he was makdish, and then the father died, or no, where he bought it from the father died, and then he was makneh? This is the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon on the one side, and Reb Meir on the other. And says the Gemara, "Be'ilu the Rabbi Yehuda Reb Shimon." This particular case of Meis Aviv Achar Kach Ikdisha Lo Tzricha Kra, that's pasha that's a case of Stei Achuza. So then the Gemara says, "My lav b'hakem iflagei." Isn't this in fact the same exact machlokes of Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish? How so, might you ask? The Gemara articulates 2/3 of the way down. The Rav Meir Savar. Rav Meir is of the opinion that kinyan peiros ke kinyan haguftami, that when one has access to peiros, they also, it's as if they have ownership of the land itself, of the orchard itself. Uveha b'misas aviv hu delo yaris v'lo midi. With the death of the father, he doesn't really inherit anything. He has access to the peiros, but he doesn't actually own the land. And therefore, in regards to a case where if the father dies and afterwards the hektish happened, we need a pasuk to teach us that that's a case of stei achuza. Rabbi Yehuda, Reb Shimon, Savrei, Kinyan Peiros, Lav ki Kinyan Aguftami, and they hold differently that really Kinyan Peiros is not like Kinyan Aguf. Ubeha b'misas aviv hashtahu dekayaris, and because of the fact that he now actually does inherit the property, v'hilkach mesaviv achar kachik dishalot tzricha kra. Therefore, in his case, where the father dies first and there's hektish, there we don't need a pasuk. Where do we need a pasuk? We only need it in a case of where the hektish happened first. So this is the machlokes of Meir on the one side, Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon on the other, and it aligns with the machlokes seemingly of Reb Shimon ben Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Says the Gemara, I disagree entirely. 3/4 of the way down, about 15 lines from the bottom of the page, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. No. Really, they hold that when you have access to peiros, it's as if you own the whole orchard. Over here in this case, Rabbi Yehuda Reb Shimon, they actually have a different reason as to why they hold the way that they do, because the pasuk that we were discussing has an extra word. What was the extra word? So it says the Gemara, Lichtov Rachmana, what the Torah could have written but didn't write. What the Torah could have written was Im es sedei miknaso asher lo achuzaso. But instead we have another word before achuzaso. Mai misedei achuzaso. So there, and on this we had the drash of Sadeh she'ein ru'i leo sadeh achuza, yatzas azusha ru'i leo sadeh achuza. So maybe perhaps you can't say that the reason why Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon disagree with Reb Meir is because each Tana holds differently in regards to Kinyan Peiros ke Kinyan Aguftami. Perhaps it's only because there's an extra word, and therefore we reject the comparison. We tried to say, let's just summarize so far, we tried to say that perhaps the machlokas Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about whether or not we say Kinyan Peiros is ke Kinyan Aguftami, we tried to say that maybe it's rooted in the machlokas and Tanaim between Rabbi Yehuda and Shimon on the one side and Reb Meir on the other. We say now that that is in fact not the case. Let's move on. The Gemara says 7 lines from the bottom, give or take. Exactly. Amar Rav Yosef. He loved Amar Rav Yochanan, if not for the fact that in one place Rav Yochanan held Kinyan Peiros ke Kinyan Aguftami, that when you have access to Peiros, it's as if you own the entire orchard. Lo matza yodav v'raglov beveis hamedrash. He wouldn't have his hands and feet in the base medrash, which basically means that we wouldn't have understood another shita of his that he taught. What is that? To Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rav Yochanan, ha'achin shechelko lekuchos, shechilko lekuchos hein umachzirin zel zebeyovel. You have 2 brothers who, when they get their Yerusha, it's as if they're buyers, and they have to return each half of their Yerusha every Yovel. The Isal Kadaitach, and if in fact we would have held, if Rav Yochanan would have held that Kinyan Aperos is Lav ki Kinyan Aguftami, then Lo Mishkachas the Maisi Bikurim Ela Bechad Barchad Ad Yoshua ben Nun. Then the only time we would have had Bikurim with Kriya, which is actually lacking from the Gemara, but it's added here by the Rishonim, that would have only been true by descendants of Yoshua ben Nun who only have 1 child. That's the only time we ever would have had such a case where you were Koreh, and that's definitely not the case. And therefore, it is Nacharaya that Rav Yochanan is of the opinion that Kinyan HaPeiros is Kinyan HaGuftami, that if you have access to the Peiros, it's as though you own the field itself. And the Gemara now pivots to the Shita of Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says Kinyan HaPeiros is lav Kinyan HaGuftami. That when you have access to the Peiros, it is not as if you own the orchard. And says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Kra Umasnisa Mesaye le the Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish has a source in the Psukim, and Reish Lakish has a source in the Brisas. Kra, what is the pasuk that supports this shita? Because what does the pasuk say? This pasuk is from Sefer Vayikra b'mispar shnei tevuos yimkor lach, with the b'mispar, with the amount of the years of tevuos of grain. That is when the mechira takes place. What is this talking about? So take a look at Rashi, the top Rashi on the page Dibur Hamaschil. B'mispar shnei tevuos u'v'shas hayovel mishtai. We're dealing with a time. The pasuk's dealing with a time of Yovel. K'dichsiv b'mispar shanim achar hayovel alma. Ein guf hakarka machur ela tevuos shel kol shana. We only view the land as it relates to the peiros, but not as though you actually own the land. And that's a raya brura to Reish Lakish, who holds that kinyan hapeiros is lav ki kinyan haguftami. And then the Gemara says on the top line of Mem Chesamid Beis, and we'll be going to the top of Mem Tesamid Aleph tonight. Masnisa, what's the raya to Reish Lakish from a source in the Tanaim? Titanya, Bechor notel pishnayim b'sadeh hachozeres la'aviv beyovel, that a son, an oldest child, gets pishnayim in a field, which is chozeres la'aviv beyovel. So says the Gemara over here, clearly he doesn't own the field right now, yet we see that he still gets pishnayim. We therefore see that whether or not you own the field right now is not relevant, and that is nacharaya for Reish Lakish, that he holds kinyan haperes is lavke, what is it? Kinyan haperes is lavke kinyan haguftam. And Amar Abaye, we have yet another source. This is again separate because Rava on the bottom of the page says, I have two sources for you. He says Kra Umasnisa. And then Abaye chimes in and says Naktina. And we actually have a tradition that Baal benichse ishto tzarach harsha, that a husband, when dealing with the properties of his wife, he needs to get permission from his wife. This is in regards to nichse malug, in regards to the properties that she brings into the marriage. Below Amran, when is this true? Ella delo nachise apire. This is only true when we're not dealing with the fruits. Because remember, the husband has access to fruits in regards to nichse maluk. If the wife brings in an orchard, he has full access to all the oranges, no problem. Aval nachis apire, but if what he is dealing with, if the sugya he's dealing with is a sugya about peiros, then he doesn't need to get a harsha from his wife, because migud mishtay dina apire, mishtay dina agufa. Because he has access to the fruits, he therefore doesn't need permission to have access to the actual. He doesn't need to get permission to have access to the actual orchard itself. This Gemara requires a lot of time. I just want to be clear. I know it's quick. I know it's complicated. And the comparisons between our case and the case of Stei Achuzah and Stei Mikna is difficult. But that does bring us to the end of the parak. Hadran Alach, Hasholeach, Yihirasum. We should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. Let's start the next parak, parak Hanizak. And this is really a primer for the future when we start learning Seder Nezikin. And the Gemara says as follows: Anizakin, those who get damaged, shaman lohen be'idis. We measure what we pay back from idis. Idis is a language that the Gemara uses for the finest of your properties. They get an A, a B, and a C score. The A score is idis, the best of the land. Ubalcho bebeinanis. When you're paying back a person to whom you owe money, their payments can come from properties that are B levels, beinanis. Isha and when it comes to a woman, she can collect her money when because the ksuba has a lien to property. She can do so from ziboris, which is the lowest quality. Now remember that we're not talking about dollar value. The dollar value is still going to be equivalent. She's collecting Masayim Zuz, but is she collecting Masayim Zuz from the A level, from the B level, or the C level? So A level for nizakin, for those who have damages, B level for those who are ba'alecho, and C level for ksubas isha. But Rav Meir argues on the third, Rav Meir Omer, of ksubas isha bebeinanis, that a woman who is due to get her ksuba, she is allowed to collect her 200 zuz, whatever amount is in her ksuba, from properties that are B level, which are beinanis. That's din number 1 of our Mishnah. Din number 2, ein nifrayin minachasim mishubadim, let's say that you owe me something and you have properties, So it's not fair that you should give me a property that has a lien on it with somebody else when you have properties that are bnei chorin that have no liens on them at all. That doesn't even make any sense. You say to me, Phil, I want to pay you back. This property, by the way, this property has a lien on it. I'd be like, no, thank you. I want your property that has no liens on it at all. And that means even if that field is ziborous, even if that field is a C quality, it doesn't matter. We still, I would rather take that quality, because remember, the dollar amount is the same. I'd rather take the ziborous and trade it out if I want to. But Lamaisa, when it comes to paying people back, there is a preference for paying back properties that don't have a lien instead of properties that do. And again, in regards to nichse yisomim, they only collect from the ziboris. Then the Gemara has a laundry list of things. Ein motziin, we don't take money, lachilas peros, in regards to eating fruit, uleshvach karkos, for the increase in value of property, ulamazon ha'isha ve'habanos, or food that a husband has to provide to his wife and sons, minachasim mishubadim. You're not allowed to do that from properties that have a lien, mipnei tikun ha'olam, because that is not the right way to do things. We will discuss this phrase a little bit later. And last and certainly not least, v'hamotze mitzia lo yishava. Wow, that's out of left field. Okay. The Mishnah says that if you find a mitzia, you should not make a shvua. And then the Mishnah says, mipnei tikun ha'olam. And Rashi here, the last Rashi on the Mishnah, which is 2/3 of the way down, Dibur HaMaschel mipnei tikun ha'olam, says that this line of mipnei tikun ha'olam is not limited to the previous words of v'hamotze mitzia lo yishava, but rather, as Rashi says, akul hukoi applies to the entire Mishnah. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. Even the first thing you said doesn't make any sense. You said, Hanizakin shamin lahan be'idis. That first din was that when a person has been damaged, that they have to be paid back through idis, through the A+, only through the best of properties. And what did the conclusion of our Mishnah say? That it's because of tikkun olam. The Gemara calls garbage on that. That's not correct. Why? What does the Gemara say? Mipnei tikkun olam. You think that the reason you have to pay back someone who has been damaged with the A quality is because of tikkun olam? Absolutely not. Deoraisa that's a din deoraisa. The fact that you get paid back with idis is not the chachamim. It's a din deoraisa. T'chsiv meitav sadeh meitav karmo yishalem meitav, the best of your field and the best of the vines. That's how you should pay. Mehecha takes you that it's mipnei tikkun olam. That's not correct. The fact that you pay idis is a din deoraisa. Amar Abaye, halfway down on Memches Amid Beis, Lo Tzricha Ela LeReb Yishmael. You're absolutely right that according to the Tanaim in general, you're correct that our Mishnah is a din deoraisa. The fact that we pay idis in regards to those who are collecting from damages, that's a din deoraisa. But Ela LeReb Yishmael, Do Amar Mi deoraisa bidin nizak shaiminon, Kamash Madlan Mipnei Tikun Olam shaiminon bidin mazik. This is a big idea that we're going to find in Seder Nezikin, and that is that when we say that someone who's been damaged gets paid back by idis, whose idis are we talking about? The nizak, the one who was damaged, or the mazik, the one who caused the damage? So Rabbi Shmuel says that mideoraisa, we really measure b'den nizak shaimin, and we really measure based on the nizak. But mibnei tikkun olam, we're going to be machmir and say that if the mazik has better properties than the nizak, then mibnei tikkun olam, because we don't want people to be in the habit of hurting people, we always want them to have a higher punishment. So even though ladina mideoraisa b'den nizak shaiminan, really it should just be based on the properties of the one who was damaged, and if his best property was a low quality property, okay, but midrabanan mibnei tikkun olam, we're going to kick up a notch and say that it's b'demazik shaiminan, that really we're going to look at the properties of the person who caused the damage, and we're going to say, no, if your properties are a higher quality than the nizak, you need to pay from the idis, even though midoraisa that's not true. Says the Gemara, my Rabbi Shmuel. How do we understand the sheet of Rabbi Shmuel? The Brisa says, the Tanya, the Gemara explains, we said, Meitav Sadehu, Meitav Karmo Yishalim, which above we used as our question to say, how can you say that our Mishnah is Midrabanan when it seems to be that Meitav Sadehu, Meitav Karmo Yishalim, that you need to have the best standard of your Sadeh and your Keren. So Rabbi Shmuel understands this pasuk differently than we initially understood it. Says the Gemara, that the way we understand this pasuk, that you have to pay back the highest standard, is when we're looking at b'denizak shaimin, and when we're looking at that of the properties of the one who got damaged. Rabbi Akiva Omer, lo ba kasuv ela legabos lenizakim min ha'idis. That's not correct. You misunderstood. We're always talking about the mazik, and it needs to be that way. And the Gemara says, v'kal v'chomer lehektish, which we are not going to focus on today. We will learn in the coming days what this line means, but not now. So then the Gemara poses a question against Rabbi Shmuel. The Gemara says 7 or so lines from the bottom on Mem Chesed Beis. Rabbi Shmuel, I don't understand your shita. What is Rabbi Shmuel's shita? Rabbi Shmuel says that really bidin nizak shaymina, that if a person gets injured, that when we say that the nizak should collect based on idis, on the A plus properties, that whatever his A plus is, that's what the mazik has to pay, even if it's the mazik's ziboris. So says the Gemara, I don't understand Rabbi Shmuel. Well, the Rabbi Shmuel, I understand that ochal shmeina mishalim shmeina, that if I ate from a fatty land, meaning from a wonderful land, mishalim shmeina, that I understand. But ochal kusha, if the damage that I caused in your property, you're the nizak, if the damage that I caused was on a kusha, on a low quality land, mishalim shmeina, I'm going to pay you back with a property that's even better than what I stole from you. That doesn't make any sense. So says the Gemara, Amar Avidi bar Avin hacha b'mayaskinan kigon she'achla aruga bein ha'arugos, where I, the mazik, consumed one row among many rows of your food in your field, but v'lo yadi'inan ikhusha achal ishmena achal demishalem le'mi meitav. So I'm the mazik and you're the nizak. I go into your field, you have 5 rows of vegetables, and I walk through and I literally harvest everything in one row and I eat everything. But I don't know the status of that field, of that row. Was that row idis, benonis, or zibris? I don't know. So according to the Shita of Rabbi Shmuel, even though we don't know, we pay with the highest standards of the mazik. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. And the Gemara asks a beautiful question, again, one that we're going to see many times in Shas. We've already seen it a few times. This makes no sense. Rabbi Shmuel, I don't understand. You're saying that if I, as the mazik, don't even know what I consumed, maybe it was kusha, maybe it was shmena, the punishment is that the mazik has to pay to the higher end. Hashta de lo yadinan mishalim shmena. Now that I don't know what I actually consumed, you're going to hold me to my own property's highest standard? Who says, after all, hamotzi mechavero olav araya. If you don't know what I ate, you can't bill me for the highest possible category. Perhaps I ate a kusha. I ate a field that really wasn't growing very well. And you're going to charge me for idis, for the shmena? Hamotzi mechaver olav araya. You can't bill me for that, Rabbi Shmuel. How can you say in the Mishnah that mipnei tikun ha'olam, that because you want to tell a mazik, you should be careful and not injure people and not take their properties, we're going to slap you on the wrist with the highest fee? That's not allowed. We have a halachic principle that doesn't allow for that. So it could be that I ate shmena, could be that I ate kusha. You cannot tell me that I have to pay shmena. Last line of Mem Chesed Beis, and we actually will be stopping right in the middle of a sugya. Really, what's going on here? Kigon shahayisa idis denizak kiziboris demazik. Really, the din is that we follow the nizak. And the idis of the nizak, the best field that the nizak had was my mazik. Rabbi Shmuel savar bid the nizak shaiminan, and therefore we give an idis property, and Rebbe Lazar savar bid the mazik shaiminan, and therefore we give a ziboris property. We don't fully understand this yet. We'll understand it more tomorrow, but we're going to stop right here and pick up tomorrow on the 4th line of Mem Tesem Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
If anybody's interested, I have